we have to, I think, realize we live in a world that is much more like Orwell's 1984 than it was in 1984 or it was in the 1990s.
One of the interesting things about what's going on right now is how more totalitarian China is becoming I mean, in the recent last few years, months and years. It's getting worse right now. It's not getting better. And that can be seen in the social credit system that
Yeah.
eerily seems to be mimicked in Google. Doesn't it seem to you? I mean, it doesn't seem like we're getting aspects of that over here. Just it, and if they can combine the social credit system with our hordes of mobs like Antifa and the Twitter mobs and all that kind of stuff, they could have real power.
Yes. No, their ability to use high tech to track people has gotten, and one of the videos that was that's at the website today, uh, you know, pointed that up, that they really are able to track people on all kinds of levels. They know what you've purchased. They know all these things, and of course, it does immediately bring to mind Edward Snowden. He really, I think, made us realize our government has the same information. They haven't pulled it all together in the same way. They don't have the same lack of any citizen input and control, so they can't pull it together in the kind of tight, way that China has wrapped its intelligence agencies around everybody's head in their country. But it's there. They know, through social media and through other things, our government has, gathered a tremendous amount of information about us and could go those other steps. We have to fight this. I don't think that we have seen Congress be very effective on fighting these things, and I think there's this tendency sometimes to think, okay, we have to do these things to protect ourselves against the terrorist or to protect ourselves against the communists or the Russians or the Chinese or whoever. But the types of information that we're gathering is what China is gathering, and China is putting it to use. And it is just horrifying to see the level of knowledge they have about people. And one of the things they're doing to the Uyghurs is to send a Han Chinese agent from the government to stay with Uyghur families and spend the night and sometimes a couple of nights to get to know the family better. And of course, a little kind of pet thing of mine is to ask people at different times, what's the Third Amendment to the Constitution, and the third, number 3 in the Bill of Rights, because nobody remembers it hardly, because of course it's never really been put to use. And it was that the British were housing soldiers, forcing people to take soldiers and house them. And of course, when I see that the Chinese are literally forcing government agents into the homes of Uyghur families, it's the same sort of thing. They may need to borrow our Third Amendment. We're not really using it, thank goodness. We don't need to. But that's the level of what they're doing. And it seems to me that we've seen the tremendous promise of social media and the internet, and the fact that people all over the world can get to information so fast, and information about just about everything, and they can communicate with each other and organize in ways that they couldn't before. And then there's the flip side of that coin, which is that we have places in the world right now that the government has hit the kill switch on all communications like that. And in colonial days, if they were to shut down a newspaper, somebody with a printing press would take stuff, would print stuff up and take it to people. Now almost all of our communications is done online, and over mechanisms that a kill switch can be hit, and all of a sudden we can't communicate with each other. we have to, I think, realize we live in a world that is much more like Orwell's 1984 than it was in 1984 or it was in the 1990s, and that governments are becoming more and more sophisticated, just like corporations are becoming more and more sophisticated at tracking us and being able to know what we're doing. And I think we've got to get a handle on this, or I really, shake in my boots to think what's going to happen in 10 or 20 or 30 or
Right.
40 years.
I've been thinking recently about three things that could happen that could really bring a more totalitarian aspect to us, and I think they're 5G, AI, and a demand for more security.
They're already using AI, and China's using AI a lot. Excuse me. It may be kind of a beta version. It may be a not a very sophisticated version, but it's going to get better and better and better. And we may be guarded by robots a lot in the future, and we're already, in essence, being tracked and dealt with by robots and by AI. And
Right.
I mean, a camera that's tracking us is in essence a robot that's tracking us, and it's expensive for them to have someone watching all this footage. But of course, if they can develop an eye that is able to determine certain things through artificial intelligence, these things are not far off. And in just doing a little look-see at what's the latest happening in China, because of all that's going on in Hong Kong and all the controversy. I just was really floored by the level of their kind of total control and knowledge in the Uyghur areas. And this isn't happening just there; it's happening all over China. They have the government has an app on people that anywhere in China is telling them all kinds of information, and they have the social credit system and things that are just draconian. But in the Uyghur areas, you can't travel 200 yards without having another checkpoint, look at your papers and so on. And in essence, it seems like our society, we're so quick to say that the West is so terrible about different religions, different races, and we're all racist, sexist, terrible people. And obviously there's racism and sexism throughout the world, but it always strikes me that our society is the least that way in the world, which doesn't get you brownie points. You can still be a bum and be better than some other bum. But the bottom line is what's happening in China is obviously the desire to just completely wipe out this culture and this religion and just force them to be Chinese and to have different attitudes that fit with the Chinese Communist Party and how they want to rule that country. And it's happening right before our eyes. If Hitler were in Germany today and had 1 million people in concentration camps, I think we'd be talking about it. And yet China, for years now, has had hundreds of thousands, if not 1 million, or some people estimate it to be 2 million people in concentration camps, in re-education camps. Torture is taking place. That Amnesty International's come out and in different interviews they've done with people throughout the country, and especially in the Uyghur areas in the northwest of China, have documented these things. And yet it just seems like there's very little talk about it. And then, something as seemingly American as the National Basketball Association it doesn't seem to be very aware of what's going on. And I think the American people are in essence more aware than our leaders and these big companies, because all they see is 1.3 billion customers. And we have to be sophisticated enough to know that they're likely to have stars in their eyes about all the money they can make off of 1.3 billion people. But it's going to be a Pyrrhic economic victory if they're empowering China to do what they're trying to do in Hong Kong. And of course, as we've discussed in previous videos, Taiwan could be next, and who could be after that? And you know what? Somewhere on that list is you and I.
I often think about what can we do on a personal level to avoid scrutiny by AI and corporations, but especially the government.
And it might be good just to take a second right there and explain, because some people sometimes, well, why would you be scared of the government and not scared of companies? And the truth is, I think we are a little bit scared of companies knowing too much information, and maybe a lot scared. The difference is that companies can't put us in prison and can't dictate how we live our lives. They mainly want to know what we want so they can sell it to us and convince us to want theirs and to make a bunch of money off of us. And, you know, you can like that or not like that, but it's not the same as what a government can do. If some company in China knows all kinds of things about people and is trying to sell them something, that's not the same thing as the government, which sees that they've written a blog post it doesn't like and puts them in prison. So that's the difference.
Consider what's happening in Hong Kong, all these people wearing masks. That could happen in America, just simply of people trying to avoid being followed and avoid being, marked
Yes.
by artificial intelligence from place to place. Now, in many cities of the country, there have been laws against masks because masks are used in robberies and things like that. But it's interesting that the worse the government is, the more the people must behave kind of like criminals,
Yes.
just simply to be free. And I think that's coming. Also, another thing I think is coming is the popularity of metal fabric, that is fabric with metal strands in that, to prevent uh, microwave, RFID, that kind of stuff.
In Hong Kong, they're wrapping their IDs and stuff in aluminum foil, you know, kind of like the folks who have the aluminum foil on their head because they don't want, aliens to control their thoughts. Well, they may not be as kooky as you think, because they are doing that. Otherwise, they're afraid that the government's, they're going to be able to read that they just went through the turnstile at the subway or what have you.
Yeah, everyone now, their wallet should have some protection from that kind of reading. Mine does. I have metal next to my cards. And you can buy special wallets that are very nice, by the way. There's some really modern wallets that I really highly recommend to almost anyone that protect you against searches. We're talking about searches. We're talking about search, if not seizure. And
Right.
people are the ability to search you when you think you're in private. I mean, when you have your wallet, when you have your cards in your wallet, you think you're private. That's not true, really, anymore.
Yes. And, this is not my area of, tech is, as you know, I mainly complain about, computers not working the way I want them to. I'm not, I'm not one of these people who's tech savvy. I would never say that. Um, but I think that we all have to, I have to get more tech savvy, and mainly I think once people start to say, hey, I want some protection against, being searched and surveilled all the time, people will help us find out how to do that. But we have to want it in the same way that I think we have to start saying, what can I do to stop, Chinese totalitarians? And in fact, what can I do to stop other evil? How can I stop my government from grabbing information it doesn't deserve to have? How can I prevent the Russians from, taking over some place that they don't have any business taking over? And it may be that, oftentimes there's not much that you can do, but other times there are. And I, in the one video and asking the question to the folks who were talking about Hong Kong when I was in Taiwan, I mentioned, should we boycott Qingdao beer? which is pretty good beer, I think. And that seems like kind of a silly thing, but I think it might have more impact than almost anything else we can do. If the folks making decisions in China think that what they do in Hong Kong, is going to have negative repercussions, and if those repercussions are that the U.S. State Department is really angry at them and issues a really bitter statement, I don't think they care. And I don't think that's going to have any control over their actions at all. But if they think that their brand could start to lose sales around the world, if they think that people are going to do everything in their power to resist China and to undercut China throughout the world, and that this is permeating the populace around the world, I think that has a ton more influence on them. And as we've mentioned numerous times, we need to have an influence on them, because ultimately, Hong Kong's not safe, Taiwan's not safe, the rest of Asia's not safe, nobody's safe. If China, the most populous country in the world with nuclear weapons and a very powerful economy, is a totalitarian bunch of thugs, that's not good for us. That's not good for anybody. It's not good for those 1.3 billion people. Ultimately, we need a free China. Ultimately, we need a free United States too. But there's lots of steps here. But ultimately, that's the case. It's not a matter of, I think, just thinking, okay, we have to stop them from taking over Hong Kong, because they can do it anytime they want. We have to make them not want to do that. And ultimately, I think the more we can push back on them, the moment there's an opening, the people of China are hungry for democracy. It's not a place, I think, that you would have just powerful factions and always in civil war, with no sense of how to have a society that has more democratic checks on power. I think, and I think that's one of the things that was so inspiring about Tiananmen Square 30 years ago, was that you saw an understanding of how they could move to a free society. And I say that in a relative sense, not like every perfect society, but a free and democratic society that's sustainable. And you saw that 30 years ago. And one of the things in all the talk about the NBA, there were several people and several stories I read where there was this implication that this tweet by the GM of the Houston Rockets in favor of Hong Kong had really upset the people of China. The people of China are not upset about the idea of someone saying, stand with Hong Kong, fight for freedom. If they had a way to go to a ballot box and vote for freedom and democracy, they would do it right now. And that the only people who were upset were the Chinese rulers and the business people who have to kowtow to the Chinese rulers. And of course, kowtow being a very appropriate word.
Yeah. From what I can tell, the Chinese people are hyper aware of how corrupt their government is. In America, lots of people still think America is kind of a free, if kludgy place, right? That's kind of what,
Right.
I don't think they realize the extent to which it's in jeopardy and the extent to which it's crazy. But it's becoming more obvious to lots more people. But in China, there's not really that much argument.
The truth is, I think they show the power they have over people. There's a saying that when you use your power, you lose your power, and that power that is just recognized and never challenged grows strong, but power where you have to inflict pain on people on a regular basis, they remember that your power is derives from that pain. And I think that people in China in like you say, in probably much higher numbers than people in the United States, have a real sense of what BS they're being fed by their government all the time. You and I and our listeners and viewers know what BS we're being fed all the time. But I think there are a lot of people in the United States who, well, when I see the polls that say, you know, only this percentage of people believe their government is honest most or all of the time, and it's usually a minority of, you know, it's not a majority of the country, it's a minority of the country. But still, I always think, who are those people, and how could they possibly think that, you know, especially the people who say their government tells the truth all the time. I mean, that's just not, that's not, you have to be asleep to think that.
It's not even plausible anymore.
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
you know,
Even the government doesn't pretend it tells the truth that often.
no, and we right now have the CIA and FBI having been working for, you know, 2 or 3 years to unseat a president, and they're doing it on the most bizarre ways with lies. I don't know. I don't know the extent to which the Trump administration is also not lying all the time. Trump obviously fibs every moment of the day,
Yes.
but the degree to which lying is part of American political life is astounding.
It is, and I'll tell you, it's interesting because when I was overseas a year ago, we had the Kavanaugh hearings, and you know, it's like America flipped out, and I was in Rome, and kind of was almost glad that I missed it, and now all the flipping out about Ukraine and so on, and you know, Trump may have done some things, I wouldn't put it past him, that are impeachable, that are just sickening. And, you know, the way he, you know, you talk about Trump lying, I think that Trump has this attitude, kind of a business, a barker, a salesman attitude, that everything's terrific, and that saying something that you know is really not that good is wonderful and terrific, isn't really lying. It's the way the world works. And most business people I know, that's not the way they think. You know, they actually believe in a product or they're not going to sell it. But Trump, I think, misses all that. And so there's that. But there's also the idea that we are just going to be told again, you know, Adam Schiff's paraphrase of that phone conversation seems to be the way the media has covered that phone conversation the whole time. That he asked them to dig up dirt on a political opponent. Well, the result might be that he got dirt, but asking another country to investigate something isn't, you know, and there might be other ways to do it. His motivations might have been horrible, but to immediately go to the conclusion that they were horrible, even though we don't necessarily have any evidence that they were, and just scream impeachment all the time. And it is, I think, so frightening, because Trump was elected in a very strange election. I think that he was helped enormously by the media just being wall to wall, virulently anti-Trump, enough to basically give him the mantle of the outsider, the anti-establishment guy. I think there's a huge slice of this country who believes that he is the outsider and might actually change some things and do some things that are important for this country. Whether you agree with them or don't agree with them, if you impeach him, if his entire term, it seems that the deep state and the media and everybody's against him, I think you leave some lasting scars. We have an election in 13 months, and beat him at the ballot box, which of course, the way that the Democrats are running, you know, just people who are frightening, just frightening. You know, I don't know that they do beat him at the ballot box. I think you really, you know, his negatives are, you know, 60%. How you can't beat somebody who has 60% negatives? Well, there's only one way you don't beat them, and that's by having over 50% negatives yourself. and someone deciding his negatives are less problematic than your negatives. And that could easily happen again. But this idea that we can just slash and burn and allow a segment, maybe it's 35% of the country, that will believe they can't elect someone to do what they want done. If that happens, the powers that be will undercut our democracy and do so while they constantly talk about democracy, because democracy's now become a term that means government the way I want it. It's always kind of been a flat term that could be used all kinds of different ways, but now it hardly even means voting or anything. It means that if Trump says something, if it kind of is the same way that they treat, like, if he attacks the media, he's attacking the First Amendment. And those are two different things. You can attack, that's what the First Amendment is there for, is to attack, the first estate or the second or the third or the fourth. And so, we have not talked about impeachment and gotten into all the weeds on Trump and this whole drive for impeachment. And I guess we will at some point, but it's not very interesting to me. It's very frustrating, because I think that you could look at what Trump has done in a whole range of things. Some of the things that he did in terms of the Russian investigation, I think are very problematic. I don't agree with Amash. I don't think I'd go to impeachment over him. And you could make the case that, well, he obstructed justice. Whether you could make that in a court of law stick, I'm not sure that you could. And it just seems to me, when it's a close call, you don't go to throw out an election and to create a rift like that in the country. I think there are better ways to deal with it. And so it's, I think for people, libertarians, limited government people, we are given this choice between a personality that I think most of us do not like, do not trust, and we fear what he could do. And I have to say, he's been less fear-inducing as president than I thought he would be. But then on the other side is a media that I think is so in the tank for the Democrats. And the Democrats want a government that has such power in a world in which, we now have governments like China that, are going to be giving you credits for every move you make, that know every bill you've paid or not paid, where you've been, who you've talked to, not just China, United States. I mean, when I think, and I do often, that the government knows everybody I've called on the phone in the last 10 years, that's just, it's problematic. And I don't think we want to give government more power. I don't think the average person, even if they're much more liberal than I am, wants government to have huge amounts of power.
The problem is that some do, and the other is that siding with the Democrats in impeaching President Trump is effectively doing one thing. It's caving into the demands of public figures in the CIA and FBI. And it has obviously been a CIA FBI push to get rid of Trump from the beginning. They've worked hard at it. It's not even a conspiracy. It's just really obvious. Matt Taibbi wrote about it in a piece just on his site just this week. And he basically says, people don't realize how dangerous it is when there's a possibility of a coup. And the attitude of the intelligence community is now coup-like. They're poised to do something like a coup. And one clue about this is they went from a case against him, the Russiagate business, that I suspected smelled and was stupid from the beginning, but I wasn't certain, right? I just suspected it. It proved to be nothing. And then immediately after that, they switched to the Ukraine, which now looks even more ridiculous to me than the Russiagate thing. Because at least Russiagate, though, and I don't know, they're both pretty silly. And the press, like you were saying, CNN is characterizing this not as a request to investigate corruption in the country. They're characterizing it as interference in our elections. They
Right.
say that phrase over and over again. But
Well, and here's an interesting thing that Trump at his rally, I think it was Friday night, at his rally, and maybe it was the night before too, he kept talking about how the media always says that these attacks on Biden are unsubstantiated. And he makes the point that, what do you mean they're unsubstantiated? His son got this money. His son doesn't know anything about oil. And of course, what is unsubstantiated is that Biden broke any law in doing this, or that it was a payoff. Maybe like Trump says, geez, the Chinese guys we're negotiating with seem a lot smarter than to just hand $1.5 billion to invest in something that's being run by this guy who doesn't know what he's doing, Hunter Biden specifically. And the media is correct as far as it goes in that, well, these charges are unsubstantiated if he's saying that he committed a crime. I think what Trump is pointing out, and what I think almost any reasonable person is going to say, well, yeah, that kind of makes sense, and it troubles me, is that the son of the Vice President of the United States made a ton of money in a field that he doesn't know anything about. And that money came from people in Ukraine, and that money came from people in China, and that seems kind of not good. And of course, the media can say a zillion times, well, these are totally unsubstantiated, and they cannot run the story, and they cannot investigate. They'll all their media people can be studying and investigating Trump. But Trump's going to win that argument, because I think all of us, and none of us are saying, oh, throw him in jail. He clearly broke, law 72-27. That's not what anybody's saying. But at the end of the day, and it's why I keep thinking, what is the media trying to do? Because I think if they would report without hating Donald Trump so much in an obvious way, they'd have more impact. And in essence, he's beating them at this game again and again. And he's going to beat him on the Biden thing. The person who, and I think it was Rush Limbaugh, who said this day one as this broke, the person this is going to knock out is Joe Biden. Joe Biden, and of course, the truth is Biden was on his way out anyway. He's just not, I don't think he's with it in the way that you've got to be with it to win as running as a challenger to be president of the United States. And so I don't think he was going to win anyway. But I think this knocks him out because in whether the media ever covers it or ever asks him a single question, people who watch the news are going to know that, wow, it just doesn't look good. It doesn't look clean and above board and fair that his kid made a ton of money from foreign sources that just don't seem plausible. In the same way that I think if people knew that Chelsea Clinton made a little over $1 million doing some TV stuff for NBC, even though she doesn't seem to have any real talents in that department, and didn't produce very much of anything. These are troubling to people who are just, and again, they're not saying any crime was committed or that, this is the worst crime or most terrible, immoral thing ever done. But it's just obvious that this is not, it doesn't look right. It doesn't look right. And whether the media covers it or not, that's going to be in their mind.